My name is Rebecca Hayes. The moment that still burns in my chest happened at my own father's retirement ceremony. I walked up to the gate, only to be told my name wasn't on the list, because he had erased it. And when I glanced over, he didn't even deny it. He just smirked, as if I'd never been his daughter, never been part of this family, never been worthy of the Navy bloodline he worshipped. That was the day I realized the story my family had written for me, forgotten, dismissed, unwanted, was about to shatter, because I carried a truth on my shoulders they could never erase. It was still early when I walked up to the naval base in Virginia Beach, the spring air crisp enough to sting my lungs. The hall was already alive with banners, polished brass, and the hum of conversations from officers and families filing inside. I kept my head high as I reached the security gate, my invitation folded neatly in my hand, though the paper itself looked tired and faded compared to the glossy envelopes others carried. The young guard scanned the list on his iPad, then turned the screen toward me. My name wasn't there. Rebecca Hayes, erased, as if I had never existed. His face was professional, but apologetic, and yet the words cut sharper than any blade. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the list." Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of my father a few yards away. He was surrounded by fellow officers, his posture straight, his laugh easy, as though this was his victory parade. His eyes flicked in my direction for a heartbeat, then slid past me like I was a stranger waiting for a bus. He didn't even have to speak. That glance told me everything. I wasn't supposed to be here. Through the glass doors of the hall, I could see my brother, Michael, in his immaculate white uniform, shaking hands with admirals, his smile dazzling under the lights. Cameras clicked as if he were the very embodiment of the Hayes legacy. The applause that rippled through the crowd for him felt like a deliberate reminder of my absence. For a moment, the old ache rose in my chest, the same one that had haunted me since childhood, the feeling of being the invisible daughter, the one who never fit the family script, but standing there at the gate, the sting of humiliation fresh in my veins. I knew I wouldn't turn away this time. I walked back toward the parking lot, steady and deliberate. When I opened the trunk of my car, the truth lay waiting inside. My dress whites were folded with precision, the silver stars wrapped carefully in cloth. I unzipped the garment bag and let my hand rest on the crisp fabric. No one in that hall knew. Not my father, not my brother. No one. What they had erased from the guest list was nothing compared to what they were about to see written on my shoulders. 3 stars that carried 15 years of silence, sacrifice, and victories they could never comprehend. And today, they would. Norfolk was a place where the sound of brass bands and parade drums seeped into every corner of daily life. The Navy wasn't just a career there. It was a legacy, a crown passed down from father to son. And my father, Captain Daniel Hayes, wore that crown like it was forged for him alone. In our community, his name carried weight, his uniform commanded respect, and his presence filled every room before he even opened his mouth. From the moment he could run, my brother Michael seemed destined to inherit that legacy. He was strong, loud, athletic, the kind of boy who looked natural in a uniform even before he ever wore one. My father would beam whenever he watched Michael sprint across a field or climb higher than the rest, already grooming him as the heir to the Hayes tradition. I was different. I spent afternoons with my nose buried in books, solving puzzles, sketching out maps of long-forgotten battles, fascinated by codes and strategies more than drills and medals. To me, strength wasn't always measured by muscles or a booming voice. It was the quiet kind, the strength of the mind. But in my house, that didn't count for much. I'll never forget the sting of hearing my father tell his guests at a cookout, with a dismissive chuckle, "Rebecca's smart, but Michael, he's the real warrior." I had stood just close enough to hear it, forcing myself to swallow back tears while smiling like it didn't matter. When Michael received his acceptance letter to the Naval Academy, the whole house turned into a carnival. Relatives poured in, flags waved, and the backyard grill roared while neighbors toasted his bright future. That same week, I had placed first in a national cryptography competition, beating out college cadets and seasoned analysts. My father's only comment was a polite nod, and the words, "That's nice, Rebecca, but it's not a commission." Those moments piled up, one atop another, until they formed a wall I could never climb. Even in the framed photographs that lined the living room wall, the story was the same. There was Michael in his academy blazer, my father's proud hand on his shoulder. There was my mother, radiant beside them. And then there was me, cropped near the edge, standing just out of the center, as though my very presence was an afterthought. I grew up learning that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be the shadow, never the heir. When it came time for me to choose my own path, I didn't follow Michael into the parades and salutes. Instead, I slipped into the world of naval intelligence, a place of silence, dimly lit rooms, and eyes trained on screens instead of crowds. My battlefield was invisible, but no less dangerous. There was Iron Shield, the operation that kept me awake for 36 straight hours as we unraveled a cyber attack aimed at crippling a carrier strike group. If we had failed, 5,000 sailors could have been left adrift, blind in hostile waters. We succeeded, and the carrier sailed on, business as usual. No one ever knew. Then there was Silent Echo. A SEAL team was trapped behind enemy lines, their comms jammed, time running out. I rerouted a satellite from another theater of war, buying them the coverage they needed to escape. They made it back alive, but no one asked how. Their survival was chalked up to luck. I was never part of the story. And Midnight Falcon, a freighter disguised in the Pacific, carrying radioactive cargo that could have sparked an international disaster. With MI6 and the Australian Navy, I coordinated the intercept, neutralized the threat, and kept it out of the headlines. When dawn broke over the ocean, the world never even knew how close it had come to chaos. The medals that followed were locked in drawers. The commendations came in sealed envelopes. My proudest possessions weren't the ones with ribbons or signatures, but a single handwritten note from a SEAL I'd never met. "We're alive because of you. A man never forgets that." I kept it tucked away in a drawer, proof that my work mattered, even when no one said it aloud. Pride lived in me, yes, but it was accompanied by a profound loneliness. Because while I carried those victories, I could never share them with the people who should have mattered most. My father, my mother, my brother, none of them ever knew. To them, I was just the daughter who pushed papers behind a desk. And that was the cruelest twist of all. They never once imagined that the very ceremonies they celebrated, the legacies they boasted about, were only possible because of the unseen work I did in the shadows. I slipped quietly into the hall, keeping to the shadows near the back row. My uniform stayed folded in the trunk of my car. For now, I wore only plain clothes, invisible among the polished whites and blues around me. The space was hushed and reverent, banners hanging from the high ceiling, medals gleaming under the lights. Every detail screamed ceremony, tradition, and pride. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat and launched into a glowing speech about the Hayes family, calling us a model of naval legacy. The words made my stomach twist. Applause thundered as Michael stood in his dress whites, broad smile shining, the picture-perfect officer my father had always paraded. Each clap felt like a hammer striking down the message that he, and only he, carried the Hayes name forward. When the MC spoke of all the children of Captain Hayes, my name never passed his lips. The omission wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, rehearsed. My chest burned as whispers rose around me. "Rebecca? Isn't she the one who just does office work?" "She's not really military, not like her brother." The words cut sharper than any reprimand, each one a reminder that my own family had written me out of their story. Then, almost imperceptibly, a different kind of whisper reached me. A small group of young officers seated nearby leaned toward one another. "I've seen her name in a classified report." Rebecca Hayes. Could it be her? The disbelief in their voices was tinged with something else, recognition. For the first time, I realized there were cracks in the wall my father had built to keep me invisible. People outside the family knew, even if they couldn't say it aloud. But the deepest blow came when I found a stray folder on a side table, left carelessly among the ceremony programs. My eyes scanned the page, an internal memo regarding the guest list. At the bottom was my father's signature. It was his hand that had ensured my name would not appear. His words, written in black and white. Omit Rebecca Hayes. Do not detract from Michael's recognition. The sting of betrayal burned through me. My own father had erased me, not by accident, not by oversight, but by choice. For a moment I felt small again, that forgotten girl standing at the edge of family photos. But something shifted as I sat there in the back row. Anger sharpened into resolve. I refused to let them keep writing this story for me. This time, the truth would walk into the room, whether they welcomed it or not. I stepped into the hallway to breathe, the polished wood floor echoing softly under my shoes. The air out here was cooler, quieter, but not enough to drown out the voices drifting from around the corner. I froze when I recognized Michael's voice. If Rebecca shows up, he whispered urgently to a fellow officer, she'll take everything from me. She always has. Even when no one noticed. I can't let that happen. His words were heavy with desperation, his usual confidence stripped away. His friend gave a tight, uneasy laugh, offering no reply. But the look on Michael's face, anxiety etched into every line, told me more than his words ever could. He wasn't proud of me. He wasn't indifferent. He was terrified. That moment snapped everything into focus. It wasn't just my father who had worked to erase me. My brother, too, had lived in fear of the truth about me. The two men who should have stood beside me had instead become allies in my erasure, bound not by pride, but by fear of being overshadowed. I slid my hand into the pocket of my coat, fingers brushing against the folded letter from a seal I had saved long ago. The ink was smudged, but the words still carried weight. We're alive because of you. A man never forgets that. My grip tightened around it as I whispered to myself, the truth doesn't need me to shout. It will speak for itself. The pain of their betrayal settled deeper, but so did my clarity. They didn't want me here because they knew. They knew if I stepped into the light, I would eclipse them without saying a single word, and that was exactly what I intended to do. The wind off the Virginia Beach shoreline whipped through the parking lot, carrying the salt of the ocean and the faint echo of distant gulls. I opened my car door and slid inside. The noise of the ceremony muffled behind layers of steel and glass. On the seat lay the garment bag I had carried with me, untouched until now. I unzipped it with steady hands, revealing the pristine white of my dress uniform. Every crease was sharp, every line exact, the product of years of discipline no one in my family had ever acknowledged. I buttoned each clasp deliberately, as if fastening every slight, every dismissal, every wound I had carried. 15 years of silence and sacrifice sealed into fabric. When I pinned the 3 polished silver stars onto my shoulders, the weight settled differently, not as a burden, but as proof. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone was the woman who had been erased from family photographs, written out of stories, left standing at the gate like a stranger. The face staring back at me was Rear Admiral Rebecca Hayes, and there was no mistaking her. My phone vibrated on the console, the screen flashing with a secure coded message. I opened it quickly. We know they didn't invite you. Remember, your presence matters more than they want to admit. The words tightened my chest. My superiors knew. They saw. They wanted me there, even when my own blood didn't. I drew in a deep breath, my hand resting briefly over the stars on my shoulder. Not for revenge, I whispered to myself, but to step into the light. And with that, I opened the door, the wind catching the edge of my cover as I prepared to walk back inside. The air inside the hall was heavy with ceremony. Every eye turned toward the stage where the master of ceremonies was preparing to introduce my father. His voice rang out with rehearsed dignity, the kind meant to frame a man's life as a triumph. The audience sat perfectly still, 100 uniforms in sharp rows, every breath synchronized in silence. Then I pushed open the doors. The sound of them swinging shut behind me carried farther than I expected, a ripple through the quiet. I walked forward, each step measured, heels striking the polished floor with the steady beat of a drum. Heads turned, conversations faltered. At first, no one quite believed what they were seeing, until one voice cut through the silence. A SEAL, older, battle-worn. The lines on his face etched deep. He had been there on Silent Echo, the mission where my decisions had saved his team. His chair scraped back as he rose to his feet, chest high, voice booming. "Admiral Hayes, front row!" For a split second, the hall froze. Then the wave began, one by one, then all at once. 300 SEALs stood in perfect unison, the thunder of their chairs echoing like cannon fire. The sound rolled across the hall, shaking the walls, rattling the chandeliers. The MC's hand trembled. The microphone slipped from his grip and crashed against the floor with a piercing shriek. He stood paralyzed, the script in his hands suddenly meaningless. I caught sight of my father. The glass of wine he had lifted mid-toast hung motionless in his hand. His face had drained of color, eyes wide in shock, frozen in a silence that spoke louder than any speech he could have given. Michael, on the other hand, looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Fear and disbelief twisting across his features. I kept walking, unhurried, my steps echoing like the toll of a bell. Every pair of eyes in the room followed, drawn not by demand, but by truth. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge the shock. I simply advanced, the silver stars glinting under the lights. The hall had been their stage, their legacy, their story. But with every step I took, it was rewritten. And for the first time, the truth spoke for itself. The hall had gone utterly still. 300 SEALs locked in rigid salute, the light from the chandeliers glinting against the crisp white of my uniform. Every breath in the room seemed to hold, waiting for what I would do next. I didn't falter. My heels clicked steadily as I moved down the center aisle, the crowd parting without a word, the silence heavier than any anthem. At the front row, I paused, turned, and lowered myself gracefully into an empty seat. The act alone shifted the balance of the entire room. I didn't need a microphone or a speech. The truth was already written across the 3 silver stars that caught every eye. One by one, senior officers rose from their tables and approached. A vice admiral with a chest full of ribbons grasped my hand firmly. His voice pitched low. "It's good to finally meet the name behind those reports." Another followed, and then another, each handshake carrying a weight of recognition I had been denied for years. Finally, a 3-star admiral leaned close. His words meant only for me. "If it weren't for you, ceremonies like this wouldn't even exist." His tone was steady, but the gratitude in his eyes cut through me sharper than any applause. From the corner of my vision, I saw my father frozen in place, the glass of wine trembling slightly in his hand, as though he couldn't decide whether to hold on to it or let it fall. Michael sat hunched forward, gaze fixed on the floor, unable or unwilling to lift his eyes to me. Their silence screamed louder than the speeches that had erased me. I folded my cover neatly into my lap, my posture unflinching, my face calm. I didn't stand to address the room, didn't explain or defend. I didn't need to. Sitting there, fully seen, fully undeniable, was the answer they had spent decades trying to avoid. And then it came. A single clap, hesitant at first, then another, then a swell that filled the hall. Applause rose in waves, not summoned by the MC, not prompted by tradition, but pulled from the audience by something they could no longer deny. For the first time in my life, I wasn't erased, overlooked, or forgotten. For the first time, the story couldn't move on without me at its center. As the ceremony dissolved and guests drifted toward the exits, murmurs trailed behind me, eyes still fixed where I sat. Michael approached first, his voice unsteady, almost breaking. "How long have you been hiding this?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. 15 years. The number hung in the air, heavy enough to knock the breath from him. He staggered back a half step, exhaling like a man finally crushed under a truth he had avoided. Then my father came. He said nothing. His eyes lingered on the stars at my shoulders, tracing every seam of the uniform he had once deemed impossible for me. His hand twitched around the glass he still held, but he didn't speak a single word. Instead, after a long, taut pause, he gave one slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't an apology. It didn't erase decades of dismissal, but it was acknowledgement, real, undeniable acknowledgement, for the first time in my life. And in that silence, his nod confessed more than any words ever could. He had been wrong. 6 months later, I found myself back in Norfolk, the old house unchanged. The air inside carried the warm, familiar scent of my mother's roast. The flag outside the window still weathered from years of wind and sun. Yet something was different. In the living room, the glass cabinet that had once displayed Michael's Naval Academy portrait now held one of my medals. Its ribbon of red and blue was perfectly straight, catching the light with quiet pride. For the first time, my story had a place in this house. At dinner, my father leaned forward, his voice stripped of formality. He asked about the logistics of leading intelligence teams across continents, his tone marked by genuine curiosity instead of polite dismissal. My mother listened intently, smiling in a way that felt lighter than before. Michael sat quieter than ever, his fork still, his eyes softer. No rivalry, no defense, just recognition. Later, driving away beneath the dark Virginia sky, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. No shadow lingered there anymore. What I saw was whole, steady, undeniable. I smiled and whispered to myself. The greatest acknowledgement never came from them. It was always within me, and today, I claimed it for good.